Now let's look at capacity. When does a person have capacity to make their own decisions, or to write an advance directive, or to appoint a medical agent or enduring guardian? Well, the person is presumed to have capacity. It's based on the United Nations principle of presumption of capacity. I don't have to prove to you that I'm competent. I'm competent unless you can prove that I am not. Now, be very careful, and I would hope that anyone who is here today probably doesn't need to be told this, but just because someone's older doesn't mean they have lost capacity. If you're under 80, you've got about a 12% chance of having dementia. That means you've got an 88% chance that you haven't. If you're over 80, it goes up to about 18%. That means an 82% chance that you haven't. If you're over 90, it goes up to about 35%. That means a 65% chance that you have not got dementia, even if you're over 90. So if someone, just because they're an older person, doesn't mean they lack capacity. Doesn't mean you start talking to the family instead of to the person themselves. If you do, of course in res care, a much, much higher percentage of people will have dementia. But even then, if you want to find out if the person does or does not have capacity, can I please ask you not to use the mini mental state exam? It is not a capacity assessment instrument. It's a screener, not too bad for measuring change across time, but there's really good evidence that it shouldn't be used for older people and people with low education. So who does it get used for? Older people and people with low education. I once asked one of my research assistants if I could administer it to her, and she came in borderline competent. She wasn't, of course. She was just a woman with low education that used to come in and help me with mail-outs and things. She was such a sensible woman, I would have left my centre in her care any time. I asked a medical student to take 7 from 100 and keep taking 7 from the results till I told him to stop, and he said, not without my calculator. I asked someone else to spell world backwards. She said, I'm a rotten speller, I probably couldn't even spell it forwards. And on the basis of such stupid questions, people are deprived of their rights to make their own decisions. Not okay, folks. People do have to understand the nature and the effect of the decisions to be made. They need to be able to take the information in, think about it and give you an answer. But a lady who came to me in Queensland when I was a JP up there and asked me to witness her document, I said to her, tell me what you think this document's about. She said, well, it's about what treatment I want or I don't want if I can't speak for myself in the future. Yep, that's what it's about. And in here you've said, if you're in a persistent vegetative state, what does that mean? Defined in the document up there. She said, well, I'm unconscious and I'm breathing probably okay, and I could even have my eyes open, but I'll never really be conscious again. Close enough for the purpose of the exercise. She didn't need to tell me what a pathology was doing, what a blood gases were doing. And I said to her, well, you've said if you're in that condition you don't want CPR, what does that mean? She said, well, it means if my heart stops, I won't push on it to make it go or give me a shock to make it go. I said, then what would happen? She said, well, then I'd die, but I'd rather die than be like that. She understood the nature and the effect of her decisions. I had no problems witnessing her document. The person also has to be able to communicate their decision in some way, not necessarily by speaking or writing. One of the first case that went to the Guardianship Tribunal in Queensland was a man who'd been they thought he was tetraplegic following a car accident, but he recovered the ability to nod and shake his head. He'd been on a ventilator and taken off 3 weeks before, and he didn't want to go back on. His wife, his mother, his intensive care specialist and his spinal unit specialist all said he knew what he was doing. His sister said he didn't, and she brought two psychiatrists in who also said he didn't. And the case went to the tribunal, and they brought in all the specialists in the experts on both sides, and finally the tribunal said, you have not proven that he lacks capacity. So I was asked to go over to the spinal unit and help him complete his advance directive, and his wife and his doctor and his nurse walked him through. If you want, if you can't breathe, if your heart stops, do you want CPR? If we can't breathe, do you want us to put you back on the ventilator? I thought he'd shake his head off his shoulders. If you can't swallow, do you want us to feed you with a tube? And all the way through. We did get to the end where it says other, and they said to me, what else should we ask him? And I said, well, what other treatment is he facing? Because it's actually easier to craft a directive for someone who has an illness when you're trying to be specific. They said, chest physio. So I said, ask him. They said, do you want chest physio? And he said, yes. And I thought, uh-oh, is he competent really? And they said, no, he hates chest physio, but he knows it makes him comfortable, and we've promised him we would never use it to prolong his life. In fact, they wouldn't be prolonging his life, they'd be prolonging his dying. However, that convinced me of his capacity. His wife signed on his behalf, his doctor signed, I witnessed it, and that man died 3 weeks later, which was absolutely appropriate because he'd decided that his life was of such poor quality that he didn't want his dying prolonged. Now hear me, this is not euthanasia, this is not suicide. He died from his underlying disease, and he didn't want his dying prolonged artificially by the use of technology. Now, incapacity is not ignorance. If I haven't been given adequate information, it says nothing about my incapacity, might say something about the people giving me the information. It's not eccentricity, cultural diversity, or having different ethical views. It's not communication failure. I have seen woeful communication in healthcare situations. Hands up, anyone in this room who has never made a bad decision. Yeah, me as well. I've made some doozies in my day. I don't think I lacked capacity at the time, but looking back, I'm not putting money on it. But making what someone else thinks is a bad decision is no evidence of incapacity. People can make their decisions for good reasons, bad reasons, or no reasons. And they don't have to tell you what the reasons are. I've heard medical practitioners say, oh, well, but how do we know what they knew and understood before they wrote their advance directive? Doesn't matter. And the point is, people can make their decisions for any reasons. Great if they'll discuss it, great if they'll tell family, all of that's ideal. But they can write their decisions and they don't have to give reasons at all. And actually disagreeing with your healthcare provider is not an evidence of incapacity either. Sometimes it might be the opposite. Remember on that list I showed you of what people most fear, and I said most people are not afraid of dying. But some people have a really clear idea of how it's going to be after they die. For example, a famous physician died and he went up to heaven. And when he got to the pearly gates, he smiled benignly at St. Peter and he went to walk straight through. St. Peter said, excuse me, go to the back of the line, please. Oh, my good man, you obviously don't know who I am. St. Peter said, doesn't matter who you are. Up here, everyone's equal. Go to the back of the line, please. Well, he was not impressed. He didn't think heaven was going to be like this. And then about half an hour later, a famous surgeon died and the same thing happened. He fronts up to St. Peter and goes to walk straight through. And St. Peter said, excuse me, go to the back of the line, please. Oh, but I invented the surgical procedure. It doesn't matter. Up here, everyone's equal. Go to the back of the line, please. So the pair of them are back there, and they are not happy campers. They didn't think heaven was going to be like this, especially when a few minutes later, this guy in a white coat with a stethoscope round his neck walks up to St. Peter, smiles, waves, and goes straight through. Well, this is too much. So the pair of them go charging up to St. Peter and they say, excuse us, you made us go to the back of the line, but you let him go straight through. St. Peter said, oh, don't mind him. That's God. He just thinks he's a doctor. So you can write it now, and I think all adults over 18, everyone over 18 should have written their documents, because anyone could be injured in a car accident or on the sporting field. They're not just for older people or for sick people. But you can write it now while you still have capacity. You can change your mind later if you wish. Most people don't. The research has shown that once people make such documents, there's good research where people have been followed every 2 years, and very few change their minds, and if they do, they change from wanting more to wanting less treatment. So, where should you keep your refusal of treatment certificate or statement of choices? Interestingly, if you're working with groups of older people and you ask this question, often they'll say, with your will. When do people look at your will? After you're dead. Too late, she cried. You need a copy in your GP file. You need a copy given to the person or people you've appointed to make decisions for you. You need a copy accessible at home. On that one, that old lady whose document I signed in Queensland, she was so determined no one was going to miss hers, she had it in a plastic sleeve, blue tacked onto the front of the fridge. And you need to make sure that if you go into hospital, a copy goes into your file, or into res care, An alert should be put on your file, an alert should be put into the computer to say that you have got an advance directive, a refusal of treatment certificate, a statement of choices, whatever. And also it's a good idea to get a little wallet card about the size of a business card. And on one side put, I have completed a refusal of treatment certificate or a statement of choices, and this is where you can find a copy. And on the other side, I have appointed a medical agent or an enduring guardian, and this is their contact number. Laminate it and stick it in your wallet. My utopia is that when I complete my documents, I should be able to take them to my local council, have them scanned and get a little bar on my Medicare card. When I go into a hospital, you can scan that through and up come my documents. Again, not rocket science. Many of you will know that there was a nurse reported to have tattooed on her chest, not for resuscitation. Now, the difficulty there is, how would someone know under what circumstances she didn't want to be resuscitated? Someone also told me that on her back she had PTO. Well, I'm not sure about that. Okay. Can I say to you, if you're going to go and get yours done by your solicitor, get a quote in advance, because the other day at one of the presentations, I think it was in WA, someone told me that her solicitor charged $3,000 to complete their enduring guardian form. It's not a difficult form. You don't have to go to a solicitor. A JP can witness it, and they charged $3,000. And I think that's scandalous.